Hello good people, one case review for the month is complete. The C700M has been added to my wall collection, but now it's time for another. Oh man, this hair. This is a delivery from Sweden with a model name nicely discreet on the side. Finally, we have a new Fractal Design case. Come on, Josh. The Define S2. Wow, this is an incredible review guide, pricing and everything. Usually you have to follow up. Nice. Here comes the peel. Let's do the interior one as well. Now the reason why I love Fractal Design cases is because there are no surprises. You know exactly what you're gonna get. Quality construction, functionality, this kind of like elegant, simple slash boring design. And there are no necessarily new innovations within it. They're all just refined iterations of the previous enclosure. And that is exactly what we have with the Define S2. Let's check it out right after this. Hello, I'm looking for some fans. Well, are you married? Yeah, I have a ring. What is your favorite number? I would say 3. Do I have the perfect fan for you? This is the new Thermaltake Ring Trio 12 fans with good static pressure for radiators. It is a beautiful frame with double side and center ring illumination with soft and super bright spill with Razer Chroma compatibility. Control it through your smartphone, the RGB Plus software on the PC, or Amazon Alexa. Well, I'm gonna take these home. Perhaps you should too. Check them out in the description below. So good people, the Define S2 after working with it is the combination of the original Define S and the latest and greatest features from the Define R6. Both of those reviews are up here, you can check them out. So it's a good thing and it's also a bad thing because for the price point of $149 for the Define S2, it is competing with the Define R6, which you can pick up right now for the tempered glass version for around $140. So it is slightly cheaper than the latest Define S2, which doesn't necessarily bring anything new that the Define R6 does not already have. However, it does target slightly different audience because the Define S, the original, was kind of like very roomy. And it carries over with the Define S2, but now we have the power supply shroud, slightly more features for the module vent covers and stuff. So let's begin the analysis of what is different. The case will be available in 4 colors, just like we saw with the R6. Now I have the gunmetal version, which looks awesome, slightly darker gray, not exactly black, but I was hoping it would be slightly lighter so you can actually tell that it is not black, because right now it looks black and only at certain angles when the light hits it, it looks gunmetal gray. Now I will say that while I appreciate Fractal's direction with keeping things in this whole minimalist realm, you know, the front facade is brushed aluminum, the glass panel is completely flush to the case without any thumb screws sticking out from the side because that mount has been changed now with thumb screws at the back instead for securing while transport, but also has these additional pegs for support, so you don't necessarily need to have the thumb screws in there, and keeping them off actually gives you easy access when you just pull the side panel off. We have the same mount for the back panel, and I like how they just kind of slide into the front and then they kind of close off like car doors into those pegs, so it kind of compresses the cables. You don't have to fight any little pegs that are usually found on both top and the bottom of the side panel. Awesome mount altogether, and it looks the way it has always looked for the Define series enclosure. I will say though that the gunmetal version hides the finger marks for the brushed aluminum in the front. However, the top is completely plain and slightly glossy, so all the finger marks are visible, which is unfortunate. The I/O should meet all of our 2018 expectations with 4 USB ports all blacked out, 2 of which are USB 2. We have a Type-C Gen 2 port also on here, power reset buttons that illuminate in this like very subtle white glow, which I wasn't expecting. I was expecting it to be blue, but looks like they've changed the LED, so it's a little bit more subtle now. In order to remove the front panel, you have to first slide out that giant dust filter at the bottom, easily accessible from the front, and then behind it, we have our 2 included 140mm fans. The dust filter no longer covers the entire face of the fans. Instead, we have these smaller strips on the side of the ventilation to allow more surface area and volume for the fans to intake air, and I think that is actually less restrictive for the fans, so that's a good thing. The top of the case now has the upgraded module vent system, so we have this chunky button at the back that you press to release that entire panel that gives us access to the fan bracket that can be used to mount up to 420mm radiator, so you can do triple 120s and 140mm fan installation up top. Now, the one little detail that I appreciate that you only realize having worked in the R6 are the offset little inserts for these dual brackets, because in the R6 they were right on top of each other, meaning you can confuse and place the fan bracket in the top slot instead of the bottom, and so now they're offset, eliminating any confusion as to where each of these brackets should sit inside the frame. Nice. The top fan bracket also has a fill port right beside the motherboard, so it's kind of this appropriate location for your water cooling needs. And so this whole frame is designed for water cooling systems because it is so long, so you can fit a 420 at the top and up to a 360 at the front, so giving you plenty of options to choose from in terms of your fan and radiator options. And you know, it's kind of like expected from Fractal Design. But then if you're not water cooling, a lot of that internal space is definitely wasted. But if you are installing anything up top, you can disassemble the top panel into two, so revealing a dust filter that has this angled ventilation, potentially channeling air and noise away from the user, which is nice. But the problem is twofold. So first, it is actually super difficult to remove the solid piece away from the dust filter. I had to use a knife to do so, which is the exact same issue I had with the R6. So this has clearly not been yet fixed. And number two is that when the filter is installed, there's a big gap at the front between the frame and it. So I'm not worried about dust infiltration. It just does not look very pretty. All right, so moving inside, the main thing that's been added with the Define S2 is the power supply shroud. So it's been basically ported from the R6. I love this sleek design, simple Fractal Design text, so nothing intrusive. We have ventilation above the power supply. You can also install dual SSD caddies in there. We have dual vertical PCI slots for vertical GPUs. That riser card and that little installation platform is not included with the Define S2. The motherboard tray is slightly recessed with eATX support, and the main thing that you'll notice is why is the case so long, and that is because that entire side section beside the motherboard is meant for reservoirs and thicker radiators, and all that clearance to be kind of in harmony so they don't interfere with each other. We do have these reservoir mounting brackets that you can install and have a little bit of height flexibility. I don't water cool, but from what I've seen in terms of builds from previous Define S systems is that it's quite nice to have all that space that will not interfere with a potentially long GPU and a thicker radiator in the front. There's a third 140mm fan at the back, so cooling out of the box should be just fine. But the one thing that really surprised me that I was not expecting from Fractal Design is that additional piece at the front in the, for the power supply shroud that you can remove to allow for 360 rad to go into that chamber, so you can have a lot more clearance, about 7 inches of space for really thick radiators in push-pull. But that little cover caused me a lot of issues. So with the Define R6, there was a similar situation, but the plate simply popped off, no hassle there, whereas here, it is super tight. So removing it required me to force it out almost, but worse, when it came to reinstalling it back into the case, I couldn't do it. It simply would not slide onto that second little peg closer to the motherboard tray, and I'm thinking it's because of that corner. You know, you have to almost like wedge it in, and it was almost impossible for me to do it unless I cut off that little corner on the plate, which I know is unconventional, but it's not a good design. And when I cut off that corner piece on that power supply shroud plate, it simply popped in place. No hassle whatsoever. Coming to the back, we have a few new things here, like a fan controller for 6 3-pin fans and 3 4-pin PWM fans, so that's awesome. They are powered via SATA. You can also plug this into your motherboard for that RPM control. For storage, we have 2 SSD caddies that can be relocated to the power supply shroud, and 3 new drive cages for hard drives and SSDs that look quite cool. They can also help you with cable management if you want to stash some cables in that space. And I do like that all the pre-installed cables are nicely routed along the side of the case. However, the one little weird thing is that none of the fans were connected to the hub by default, so you have to do that. So don't turn on your computer thinking that everything is being powered on. You have to remove those drive cages and find those cables and connect them yourself. We also have this handy SATA extension, so you can connect all 3 drives via one SATA cable plugged into your power supply. Nice and convenient for those 3 drives that you might populate into those 3 drive caddies. The one thing I don't like is how the drives are visible from the front because of the reservoir holes, whereas before there was like a black plate, you put on the drive there, so the drives would not be visible from the front. So that is one of those little things that come with an improvement for the drive cage, how they look from the back, but then they compromise the visuals on the interior. It's a weird mix. Well, now that we know what the case is capable of, let's do the system build. After the assembly, all I can say is that this has been an extremely satisfying experience, doing all the cable management, hardware installation, absolutely no issues anywhere whatsoever. Once you get into the groove of cable management and everything just aligns perfectly. And this is like one of the easiest things to do in terms of cable management. I love when things just fall into place and there are no 1,000 little cables floating around by default that you have to also worry about. It's just a good feeling when you look at the back and you can just slide your hand and everything's completely flat against the motherboard tray. And even though we have, there's plenty of room beside the power supply, it's just that the back area is well designed to handle any of those exits, so they're not completely sticking out thanks to those Velcro straps. Now, the one thing I absolutely love on the interior in terms of cable management are the long rubber grommets, basically spanning the entire height of the motherboard. And they're not split into like 3 or 4 like on many other cases. This means that I can route my 24-pin in the exact location where my 24-pin cable is located on the motherboard, and that's been kind of frustrating with many other cases, but not here. Obviously, there's so much extra room beside the motherboard for reservoirs and radiators, but that's not exactly what I'm going for here. And in terms of cooling, so because I recently did the Cosmos C700M temperature results with that exact system, I can compare, and the Define S2 is slightly hotter on both the CPU and the GPU for my Delta T versus ambient. And that is to say that these fans are 1000 RPM, so they are quieter versus what we saw on the Cooler Master case. Also, Cooler Master case had 3 fans. So a slightly larger enclosure, but I am surprised at how much hotter the GPU got at 2000 RPM versus the card running much quieter and cooler in the slightly bigger enclosure. All right, so I want to conclude by saying the Define S2 is a fantastic release. Fractal Design are rolling out all the modern functional features as with their previous cases into the Define S2 line, and that makes me happy. But I am a bit worried at how the Define S is now competing with the R6, which is basically an identical spec-to-step, oh my god. The Define R6 is basically identical to the S2 in terms of spec-to-spec. For water cooling, airflow, the same glass panel, the same module system, the same looks basically, but the R6 has the advantage of having that entire front drive cage system that you can move back if you want basically the layout of the S2, or move to the front if you want a little bit more concealment and space out those drive caddies. The one major critique I have with the S2 is that power supply shroud plate that in my sample would not come out and would not be put back in until I took measures into my own hands. But otherwise, like all the features and everything like that are pretty fantastic for 2018. But again, it is competing with the R6, and the R6 currently is cheaper. It is no doubt the Define S2 is a much higher end upgraded version versus the original Define S. Glass panel, module vent system, the interior, realignment, the power supply shroud, new top I/O, new dust filter implementation, new storage options. So all those things are new, and that is of course a positive. We've given many awards to Fractal Design over the years, and I feel like the S2 deserves the damn good award by default because it's basically an R6 without the hard drive modular system. But otherwise, I was hoping that it would be slightly more competitive in price point, so like around $120, so that it would isolate itself from the rest of the market and be like a really aggressive competitor in the case space that is overly saturated already. For our Canadian audience, Memory Express is a place to go for home, business, and gaming electronics. You can try before you buy, especially great for peripherals by visiting one of their stores in Winnipeg, Calgary, or Greater Vancouver, and more. They do custom PCs and will beat any Canadian price, guaranteed. But I would love to hear what you think of the Define S2, and would you choose this over the R6, and why or why not? Let me know in the comments. And yeah, thanks so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe, check out our boot sequence channel too, and we'll see you in the next video.